When your money shifts, you start feeling like a guest everywhere because you're too stable for one group and too provisional for another. And no one says anything, but you can feel the hesitation when you speak, like the room is checking where to place you. And you notice you're either talking too much or not at all, because the same jokes don't fit, the same complaints feel wrong, and suddenly you're editing yourself mid-sentence, not because you changed, but because your financial position made the room stop fitting you. Belonging doesn't break all at once, it misaligns. And the first place you feel it is not in your thoughts, but in your timing, because the room starts moving at a speed that no longer matches your internal clock. And suddenly, you're arriving early to conversations that haven't caught up, or late to ones that already moved on. When money shifts, even slightly, the pressure that once synchronized you with a group changes direction, and pressure is how groups stay coherent. Not affection, not loyalty, not history. You feel it when plans get vague instead of specific, when shared complaints feel rehearsed instead of relieving, when you hesitate before agreeing because you can already sense the cost mismatch hiding underneath the joke. No one is excluding you and no one is confronting you, but the signal has changed, and humans respond to signals faster than they respond to words. This is why you start monitoring yourself, tracking how much you speak, how much you reveal, how much enthusiasm is acceptable, because belonging is maintained by matching strain, and your strain no longer looks like theirs. The discomfort isn't about success or failure, it's about pressure distribution, because groups unconsciously equalize tension, and when your financial position shifts, the system has to decide where to place the excess. That excess shows up as pauses, softened invitations, side glances, and an unspoken question about whether you're still oriented toward the same constraints. You don't think this consciously, but your nervous system does, and it starts adjusting in real time, tightening here and holding back there, trying to refit itself into a structure that hasn't moved with you. This is the moment most people misinterpret as drifting apart, when in reality, nothing drifted. The alignment changed, and alignment is what belonging was built on the entire time. What makes this pressure feel so sharp is that it doesn't start here. It activates something much older, because most people learned where they belonged long before they ever earned money, and that lesson was encoded during moments when money decided safety, approval, or silence. If you grew up where financial strain dictated moods, arguments, or withdrawal, your nervous system learned that belonging depended on not adding weight, not standing out, not becoming expensive. And that rule didn't stay in childhood, it followed you into adult groups. When your money changes now, the body doesn't experience it as neutral improvement, it experiences it as a violation of an old agreement that said, stay aligned or risk disconnection. That's why the discomfort feels disproportionate, because you're not just navigating a present-day mismatch, you're brushing against an inherited rule about what happens when you no longer match the group's financial gravity. In many families, money defined who adapted and who was listened to, so belonging was quietly traded for compliance, and stability became associated with authority rather than closeness. When your income shifts, your system remembers this without words and starts preparing for consequences that haven't happened yet, but once did. This is where guilt enters. Not moral guilt, but loyalty guilt. The kind that asks whether you're allowed to occupy a different position without betraying the people who taught you how to survive. Groups feel this too, because shared financial conditioning creates unspoken rules about what can be joked about, complained about, or expected. And when you step outside those rules, you don't break them loudly, you destabilize them quietly. That quiet destabilization is uncomfortable, which is why it's smoothed over instead of named, leaving you carrying the tension internally. Once this conditioning is activated, the body defaults to survival logic, because belonging has always been less about being liked and more about staying regulated inside a group. When your financial position shifts, your nervous system has to decide whether the environment is still predictable, and predictability is what keeps it calm. If your income rises, you may feel vigilance, like you're waiting to be corrected or resented. And if it falls, you may feel pressure to explain before anyone asks, because the system is scanning for cues of acceptance or threat. This isn't conscious anxiety, it's pattern recognition, built from years of associating money differences with changes in power, tone, or access. Groups respond at the same level because a group's nervous system organizes around shared limits, and when one member's limits change, the system destabilizes. That destabilization shows up as awkward humor, indirect comments, or sudden sensitivity around topics that were once easy. And none of it is planned, it's regulation in motion. Your body picks up on this immediately and starts adjusting output, lowering volume, shortening sentences, or overcompensating with energy, all to reestablish equilibrium. This is why social interactions can feel exhausting even when nothing happens, because your system spent the entire time negotiating belonging physiologically. Over time, if this mismatch persists, the nervous system associates certain people or settings with low-grade threat, not because they're unsafe, but because they require constant self-adjustment. That's when withdrawal begins, not as a decision, but as a regulation strategy, and belonging starts to feel heavier the more your money places you outside the group's original range. This is where the conflict becomes internal, because even if no one pushes you out, part of you resists staying, since your identity was built inside a specific financial range, and identities are loyal to their origin. When your money shifts, you're not just moving positions, you're violating an unspoken contract that says who you are is tied to where you fit. The older identity doesn't disappear when income shifts, it watches, measuring how much deviation is allowed before connection is threatened. That's why you may downplay or normalize, because staying recognizable feels safer than being accurately placed. At the same time, the environment is responding to your new position, whether you acknowledge it or not, creating a split where others reorient while you're still negotiating permission internally. Loss aversion locks this in because your nervous system overweights the possibility of losing connection more than the potential gain of occupying a new position, so every interaction is filtered through what might be taken away. Present bias reinforces it, pulling you toward immediate comfort over long-term fit, making shrinking back feel relieving even as it deepens the mismatch. Guilt loops activate if your early conditioning tied worth to sameness, because stabilizing beyond the group's range can register as taking more than your share. Money dysmorphia distorts perception, making it hard to locate yourself accurately, so you feel out of place everywhere, referencing an old internal map that no longer matches the terrain. Neural pathways strengthen around self-monitoring instead of expression, reinforcing the belief that belonging must be actively maintained rather than passively felt. Income ceilings form here, not as numbers, but as relational boundaries, because the system learns that moving too far creates friction and emotional cost. Over time, the body associates that cost with danger and resists further movement through fatigue and hesitation. The pattern then escalates because unresolved belonging tension seeks efficiency, and the most efficient move is distance. Invitations fade, contact thins, relationships slide into low-maintenance zones that feel mutual even when they aren't fully chosen. You may look for new spaces where your position makes sense, but those spaces feel provisional, leaving you suspended between familiarity that no longer fits and alignment that hasn't stabilized yet. What makes this unsettling is that nothing ever officially ends. There is no moment you can point to, only the gradual realization that rooms that once regulated you now require effort, and that effort keeps increasing. The system updates its rules not about people, but about movement itself, quietly asking how far you're allowed to go before you no longer have a place to stand. And once that question is embedded, it doesn't stay social, it starts shaping limits that feel personal but aren't, because the real issue was never where you belong now, it's how much belonging your nervous system believes you're allowed to survive without.